Real quick before we get started, I'm enjoying doing these IDW Transformer issue breakdowns. And you know me, I'm not a like, comment, and subscribe kind of guy. I've never asked any of you to ring a bell or whatever that is for notification. I've never done it for myself or other people. I don't expect anybody else to do it for me. However, if this IDW stuff doesn't find an audience and starts to hurt the algorithm of my channel, I obviously can't continue to produce it because I can't sort of undo what I'm doing for the sake of something I want to do, if that makes sense. So my advice is, if you like this sort of content and you want to see it remain on my channel and not go behind the paywall on Patreon, to sort of share it around and spread it through word of mouth and put it in groups or whatever you got to do in order to bring attention to it. Otherwise, I'm probably going to have to take it off my channel. But of course, I'm going to give it a couple more months to see how it shakes out because I'd like to see it remain on my channel. But time will tell. Let's get started. And we'll continue our comic book series, our IDW Transformers series, with More Than Meets the Eye, issue number 5, written by James Roberts, art by Alex Milne, colors by Josh Burcham, letters by Sean Lee and Chris Mowry, with edits by John Barber. And as we remember from last issue, we ended with Fort Max warning 2 unsuspecting Decepticons that they were standing in the worst place of all time. And it turns out that he was quite right as he grabs one of those Decepticons and rips him in half. And as the other one tries to get away, he grabs that Decepticon by the back of the head, gives him one quick punch to the face, shoves his head into his chest compartment, and then closes the chest compartment on his head until Ratchet finally interrupts him just to say, "I think that's enough. I think that's plenty." And Fort Max agrees, although he does add that it felt good. In the aftermath of all of this excitement and skirmish is that Red Alert notices that Pharma may be injured, but Pharma is very defensive about him inspecting him, and Drift obviously is having a rough time, but Ratchet is sure that he can repair him. But things take a turn for the weird at that moment, where Pharma turns his gun onto Ambambolon and accuses him of being the one who releases those 2 Decepticons and to blame for the virus, and uses the fact that Ambambolon used to be a Decepticon as evidence to suggest that he would return to his old ways, or that perhaps he never truly left his old ways behind. Ambambolon says, "I was a Decepticon, Farmer. Listen to me. I'm not anymore." Which Pharma asks, "Then how come you're not infected?" He says, "I think I am. I just haven't displayed any symptoms yet." But then First Aid gets involved and says, "You know what, Pharma? I think you're lying. You said the 2 Decepticons were monoformers, but look, they had transformation cogs. And you said they attacked you, but all your injuries have been caused by a laser scalpel. Your laser scalpel. Your wounds are self-inflicted." And then Ratchet says, "Show me your alt mode. The symptoms are triggered by reconfiguration, aren't they? The virus is spread by touch, but it lies dormant until the person infected changes shape. And that's the reason why First Aid hasn't displayed any symptoms." And then Ratchet shifts his attention to Ambambolon. "And you, when you offered to carry pipes to the ward, I thought you'd use your ambulance mode. But no, you literally carried them. You can change shape. You've just never had a reason to." And that's when Ambambolon admits that he has the world's worst alt mode. He turns into a leg for a potential combiner. Ambulon, from the verb to ambulate, meaning to walk about. It's a stupid name. Then Ratchet shifts his attention back to Pharma. "And that, buddy, is why you won't change shape. You know the properties of the virus, and you know you'll get sick." And he seems to be right. And knowing Pharma's been caught, he turns his weapon to the life support machine for the other bots that are there being taken care of and takes a shot at it, potentially putting 20 of them in jeopardy. First Aid starts to scramble to try to utilize his resources to start potentially saving the lives of the 20 now in question. Ratchet sends Fort Max after Pharma and pulls Drift to safety, where Drift basically asks him to put him out of his misery if what it seems like happening is true and it's all the work of the DJD. A death at this moment would be better than what he could expect from them. While Ambambolon and Ratchet are working on the injured bots, Ambambolon informs Ratchet that one of the bots is flickering. They don't have the power to get the charge that he needs to revive. And Ratchet says, "I've got some built-in reboot coils I could hook him up to, but to get the full charge, you've got to load him into the back of his ambulance mode," which would mean that it would activate the virus. And Ambulon tries to stop him, but it's too late. Ratchet's already turned into an ambulance. helps repair Backstreet, and then takes off after Pharma because Fort Max has already reported that he couldn't keep up with them due to the size hole that he crawled down. And Ratchet catches up with him pretty quickly, but the virus has already been activated in him, and he's starting to leak. And Pharma says, Ratchet, have you ever wondered why Delphi is still standing? Or how we're able to fix all the Autobots who get injured defending the nucleon mines? Despite the Decepticon Justice Division making this planet their home, the DJD could wipe us out in seconds. But they don't, and they don't because of me. The DJD ignore us in exchange for a regular donation, transformation cogs. Leader of the DJD is addicted to changing shape. He's burnt through hundreds of cogs. Ratchet says it's a rare condition, but treatable. Pharma says, yeah, but he doesn't want to be treated. He just wants the next hit. In the beginning, it was just patients who, despite my best efforts, had died on the ward, but demand increased. Ratchet says you started killing your patients. Pharma says I made judgments based on their chances of survival. Sometimes I let them slip away. Sometimes if they were clinging to life, I helped them relax their grip. But the quota kept increasing, and Prowl kept sending a new Autobot to defend the nucleon mines. Ratchet says you could have closed Delphi or requested a transfer or just ran away. And Pharma says there would have been too many questions. I had to do something that would force High Command to shut us down without implicating me. I had to engineer a plague. I found 2 Decepticon non-entities and paid them to play the victim. Once inside Delphi, they detonated a bomb. Ratchet says, how? I thought they were locked up in their cells. Their cell. Ambambolon let them share. They were combiners. One was called Sonic, and the other, you'll like this, the other was called Boom. And at the prearranged time, when the coast was clear, they lived up to their names. Find the right frequency and volume, and you can pull a Cybertronian apart from the inside. I had the Decepticons detonate a sound bomb I invented, an echo laced with a virus. Everyone who heard the bomb got infected. And then, when they next changed shape, the coolants and disperants and anti-rusting agents in and all around their cog all cross-contaminated, triggering a slow molecular breakdown. It was loud and it was nasty, and I want you to admit, Ratchet, I very much want you to admit that you're a tiny bit impressed. Pharma goes on to say that when the bomb went off, he had intended to hide in a CR chamber, but they were all occupied. The quarantine room was the only other soundproofed environment. Then he says, when you showed up, meaning Ratchet, I panicked. If anyone could work out what was really going on, it was you. After you freed me, I had no choice but to ask Sonic and Boom to murder you and everyone else. And you should take that as a compliment. And now that he's gone and spoken all of his intentions and everything else, Ratchet points out that for the last 34 seconds, Pharma has been standing in a leaky pool of rust virus that Ratchet has been leaking out. And while Pharma is distracted, Ratchet hits him, pulls a gun on him, and insists that Pharma hands over an antidote that they both know he would have had. But while the gun is on him, Pharma says, you can't do it, can you? You can't shoot me. You can't shoot me because killing an unarmed combatant goes against every circuit in your body. And Ratchet says, if you must know, I can't shoot you because my trigger finger isn't working. To which Pharma responds in kind with, in that case, I'd like you to meet my 2 best friends. And blasts Ratchet square in the middle of his torso. Makes a run for it to the top of the structure, where he's greeted by a human projection, a solid light avatar that was slightly corrupted, but it was definitely there from Ratchet, who was able to use it long enough to get a distraction going to attack Pharma from the back, but causing the antidote to fall out of his hand and off of the top of the structure. So the scuffle engages, and they become locked in combat, holding on to each other's arms. And Pharma's basically saying, you've killed us both by letting the antidote get away. And he says, Ratchet says, I got nothing to lose. And then his arm breaks off of his body, and he says, I stand corrected. And Pharma, hanging onto the side of the structure for dear life, says, you can't leave me hanging here forever. And Ratchet responds with, it won't be forever. Look at that elbow. There's no way that's a load-bearing joint. When you fall, you'll have a choice. You can change into a jet and fly away, activating the virus, because now he's officially infected, right? Or you can stay as you are and pray the impact doesn't kill you. If you want my medical opinion, you need to make a judgment based on your chances of survival. And just then, Ratchet notices a screaming Autobot jumping from one side of the structure to the other. It turns out he's Drift, and he cuts both hands off of Pharma, forcing Pharma to make that decision a lot quicker than he wanted to. And from a narrative perspective, we don't really know if he transformed or not. But what we do know is that Ratchet's avatar was on the side of the building waiting for the antidote to fall and caught it, which allowed him to retrieve it and get it back to first aid. And this section of the story closes with Ratchet promoting first aid to chief medical officer, in part because of his performance during the drama, but also because Ratchet has deducted that it was first aid that sent the data log exposing Pharma's malpractice in the first place. And one of the last panels is seeing Ratchet, who has surgically replaced his hands that were giving him problems and potentially causing him to retire, with that of Pharma's hands, which is a pretty cool ending. With that being said, though, there is another story taking place here simultaneously, and that's of Tailgate becoming a full-fledged Autobot. And Ultra Magnus says to him, I've looked at your Autopedia entry, and I'm not easily impressed, but a bomb disposal expert who studied metaphysics under Omega Supreme, a champion kickboxer who graduated from the Ibex School of Epistemology, you put single-function Cybertronians like me to shame. But to get this badge, you have to believe in what we Autobots stand for. If you're serious about this, and Tailgate says, I am. And you think he's going to make him right there, but he's surprised to hear Magnus say, then okay, I'll help you prepare. The first step towards becoming an Autobot is learning the Autobot code. The Autobot code is more than just a 10,000-page military manual, etc., and then basically reveals to Tailgate how much work that he has to do to fully wear the badge, which is really just a fun beat of Tailgate having to kind of study this 10,000-page document in order to kind of begin his trek towards being an Autobot, which he thought he was going to be, that very second. And the only other thing that's covered in this issue is Rung's relationship as a psychiatrist to Red Alert, who he says has a paranoid personality disorder. But more importantly, we get Red Alert letting Rung in on the idea that he can hear this sound that no one else hears. And he's recorded it and plays it for Rung and says, I think it's a weapon or a power source. I don't know what. And Rung says, I do. I've been a psychotherapist for millions of years. I know a voice when I hear one. It's just been slowed down, speed it up and play it back. And when they do, it says, me, kill, me, kill, me, kill, leaving yet another mystery for us to uncover. Not only what is it, but is it saying me, kill, or is it saying kill me, typical Robert stuff. That's pretty great. And that's pretty much it. This issue is really more so about closing up this story arc with Pharma and Ratchet and Drift and First Aid. And it also really establishes the DJD and starts giving you a little bit of the insight into Tarn, which we will obviously get more into later. But it also pushes the reset button on Ratchet, right? As we've been looking at this, Ratchet has been sort of towards the end of his career, as it were. And this sort of resets the button as now he has perhaps even more, or at least arguably more talented hands at his disposal than he once did. But this is really just a loop closer for that story arc. And it gets all those bots prepared and also all of them on their way back to the Lost Light, increasing the Lost Light numbers. So all of that sort of moves that story forward. This is a narrative-heavy story just to close the cycle, close the loop, as it were, but it doesn't really progress the More Than Meets the Eye story forward a whole ton. In fact, the more interesting story towards the More Than Meets the Eye story is just the single beat with Rung and Red Alert, but we'll get back to that later. All in all, just a good closure arc to that story with beautiful art and clever writing, which is kind of the standard for the book in general, but not a whole ton of kind of nuggets to chew on in a more deep dive, break it down, see what's beneath the lines kind of matter. There are tons of Easter eggs and stuff in there. I think Red Alert, for instance, is the same patient number that his G1 toy was and little stuff like that. But in terms of like story or character stuff to break down, this is really just closing the circle and getting more characters on the Lost Light and setting up a future mystery. And I hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.